Hello and welcome to another Teach Tuesday video. Last week we heard about lecture-based courses in the distance education environment. In today's video, we expand on those technologies to take a look at discussion-based courses. Then join us back here after Todd's interview with Leah Strobel for a short wrap-up.
Welcome to another Teach Tuesday video. We're doing another video in our series about distance education. And today's topic is going to be discussion-based classes taught at a distance. And we're here with Leah Strobel, and I'll have her introduce herself in a minute. She's going to show us, talk a little bit about the courses that she teaches in a room very much like this. This is MAC 137 on the Green Bay campus, and it's a distance ed room that we have here. And she's going to talk about the pros and cons of being in such a room like this. So first, Leah, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, I'm Leah Strobel. I'm a senior lecturer of Spanish at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay in Sheboygan, and I'm also teaching on the Green Bay campus Spanish this year. And I've been teaching via some form of distance education for about 3 years now.
Great. And so tell us a little bit about the nature of your classes. So you mentioned before we started rolling that you teach both face-to-face and streaming out, and then you also teach where you're the only person in the room where you are, and you're connecting to rooms other places. Mm-hmm. So what are those environments like?
So the normal teaching space I have is in Sheboygan, and I have a room and I have students in the room with me, and we're reaching out to the Washington County campus. So I normally have 2 campuses, and one group of students is right in front of me. Last semester, in order to adapt for different things, they had me staying on the Green Bay campus. So then I taught to Sheboygan and Washington County, but from Green Bay. So that was a different experience where I was the only person in the room, but I could see both of my classes on the screen.
Yeah, so in our last video, Scott Berg talked to us about, the sort of the nuts and bolts a little bit about how these rooms are set up. And I'm curious now, you, someone who teaches in this room, what was that learning curve like? You're talking about having multiple sites mm-hmm. sort of in front of you, sort of being able to toggle back and forth in your mind, or what are the skills you had to develop, and what was that learning curve like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the actual technology itself, that didn't take long to figure out. Just that everything is pretty straightforward as far as the technology, but it is the where do you look, right? Where's the camera? Every room is different as well, so which side will I be teaching from? Is my screen going to be on the left and my students will be on the right? Microphone issues. And behavioral issues. How do you deal with behavioral issues in your class if you're not in the same room with them? So lots of technical troubleshooting that I had to figure out as far as if the receiving campus, if their volume is so loud that we can't stand to hear it. What do I do? And usually there's always some kind of staff in each room, but it's not always the case because we're very limited in the colleges as to how many staff members we have. So if someone's out sick, then there's no one there. Can
you think of a specific lesson maybe that you taught, and maybe how you first taught it, and then how you changed maybe after 2 years of teaching in that same room to accommodate the room that you were in?
Mm-hmm. Well, everything is, I think that I'm teaching the weather in Spanish right now. And everything I did before in my face-to-face classes would be, first of all, it takes me much longer to plan the lessons in the distance ed classrooms because you have to have everything set, so everything's structured. So with teaching the weather, I might have, walked into the classroom and used, I use all my acting skills and pointing, and I walk around them to, and I can talk about the weather I draw on the board, and I can do all of these things to make them understand. But in the distance ed room, I need to have visuals prepared already and know exactly what I'm going to show them in order that they understand. So I might, have, instead of drawing on the board, I have all of these slides prepared, hundreds and hundreds of PowerPoints, with the weather, and then, specific questions for my students and all of that, so.
Yeah, I'm interested about the behavior issues that you mentioned. What do you see, how is it different in the distance ed rooms compared to a regular face-to-face class?
Right. Well, if you're lucky, you have a great class and there's no behavioral issues. But my first semester teaching, I did have a moderate behavioral issue where someone was disrupting apparently through the whole class, but because I can't hear that, I didn't know it was happening. So this is one of those learning curve things. And then you don't want to get to the end of the semester and find out that people weren't hearing or understanding the entire semester because somebody else was talking through the entire class. So, what I do now is I lay it out in my syllabus, what the expectations are for the class, and I just make it really clear to them that if anything is interfering with their learning, if they can't hear, if anything's happening, they can tell me immediately, and I'll take it very seriously, and that it would be anonymous. So, just so that they know that they can complain or say something if something's not going right. Because if I'm not there, I have no idea if, how people are behaving or if something's happening. So just making that really clear to the students for the beginning and reminding them. And I have had students send me an email, hey, there's a lot of talking going on in class and I'm having a hard time hearing. So then I can, I send everyone an email first and just kind of remind them, and that usually takes care of it.
Okay. Right. And the other thing that I've heard from the Collaborative Languages program, and again, I guess for those people who don't know, the Collaborative Languages program is for less commonly taught languages, and it didn't occur to me that Spanish obviously is not one of those, but I think the instructors are encouraged to go to every site once during the semester. So if you teach in multiple sites, then the idea is that you go so you can meet each of the students. Is that a practice that's also encouraged for you?
It's encouraged. It's not. Obviously, if I try to drive to the other site once a semester. Now, I used to teach to Manitowoc, and that's less than 30 minutes from Sheboygan, so then it made it much easier for me to go to the other site. Now, if I teach to Washington County, that's a good hour's drive. So there's not any firm expectation for me to make that commute. So I try to teach my classes as, this is my class, this is where I am, everyone's part of the class here. I still try to make that drive once a semester just because it helps me as well to be able to see their faces and talk to, and I know that the students appreciate it so much when I come in, but it's not a requirement.
How do you handle some of those outside of the classroom things like office hours, things like that? Do you do anything special or different for those?
I offer online office hours through D2L right now, or Canvas, and students usually don't, just like any office hours, whether or not students take advantage of them. But I have my office hours during the week, and then I'm just available via Skype or on D2L during that same time. Or if they want to call me, they know that I'm available at that time.
What types of professional development, so now that you've sort of done this, you're kind of an old pro in the room, looking back, are there sort of professional development that you would recommend that people seek out if they're going to teach in a distance environment?
Yeah, I think, hands-on learning is the best thing. Nothing replaces just being there and getting a feel for everything and knowing how the classroom is going to go. So if you can get practice in that way. I did observe other instructors teaching in that way, so that was helpful. I think it would have been helpful for me to also sit in like a student in that classroom to know how it feels to use the microphone and how all of that feels as a student. But yeah, any kind of real experience that you can get is the most helpful.
Yeah. Are there specific skills to your discipline, to teaching Spanish, that are made more difficult in the distance environment? So pronunciation, perhaps, or something like that?
Yeah, so everything I learned about Spanish teaching before. My first semester teaching via distance was very frustrating because I felt like my hands were tied behind my back all of the time because we're always emphasizing speaking and listening. And, if I had my ideal classroom, everyone would be in a circle. We wouldn't have, distractions are the enemy in a foreign language room. So I don't want cell phones. I don't want computers. I don't want a screen that people are looking at.
Right.
All of the opposite that we need in the distance ed room. So that, took me a while to wrap my head around how can I keep the philosophy I have for teaching, good teaching, which is very community-based, and keep that, but work with the tools that I have. And I realized that pronunciation and those are all things that are more difficult because I have to take more time outside of class to make sure that I'm hearing students, more oral interviews and things like that outside of class. But what we do a lot more of is writing, which I didn't realize that I wasn't doing a lot of that before. So a lot of spontaneous writing. So if I'm having them work in groups, they can, after they're done with their groups, they can present what they talked about after orally, but they could also be writing at the same time through a Google Doc and sharing it, and it can be on the screen. So, we didn't do a lot of that in-class writing, and now that's something that's changed that I can do.
How do you think the student experience is different across being in the distant room as compared to the face-to-face room?
But I know that the students really value individual communication and any kind of interaction they can have with their peers. So the more that I learn to do that via this format, the happier my students have been. And then I haven't had, these big complaints. My first semester, it was, I was wrestling with all of these things and, trying to come up with lesson plans. And I think there were more students that felt maybe a little isolated in the class because I didn't know how to include everybody. So, in that sense, their reactions weren't as good. But since then, I think students I think they see it comparable to the face-to-face class if you can involve all of them.
So I'm curious, have your objectives changed at all in teaching in the distance rooms, or do you meet fewer objectives because you have to do less in the class? Or?
I think I've adapted my objectives. There are some things that I feel like I did have to let go of, such as I had very strong communicative classrooms, and also I was very, 100% in the target language from the beginning, even Spanish 1, which I can make happen in a face-to-face environment. And I've had to let some of those things go, because just attending to students' anxiety about the first day, they have anxiety anyways, and then I have to take more time getting them used to the technology and all of that. So I kind of let that go as far as having a strong communicative aspect to the course, at least orally. But like I said, I think that I'm trying with more writing and having them, working together more often, and reporting back to me more often instead of me, joining every single group. That's not going to be possible. So I can't listen to every student all the time, but making them more responsible in the classes. And so some things I would say they've adjusted as far as my goals, but they haven't changed completely.
Yeah, and the final thing then, this is really the final thing, objectives lead to assessment, right? And so I'm curious how your assessments are different in the distance environment compared to the face-to-face environment.
I have less written assessments in class just for the logistical aspect of there has to be somebody to collect them and scan them and send them to me. So I do have them I have more online tests and quizzes, whereas I used to do that in the classroom. But then I just kind of try to take advantage of that and make them learning experiences so that it's, they might have more than one opportunity to complete a test, for example, but because they're doing it at home, but I think that they might be learning more because they're working on it longer. So So that assessment has changed. And then in-class assessments, like informal assessments, I do a lot of, well, they learn to give me hand signals all the time, like whether or not they're understanding, and just a lot more, like checking in during class, with individual students, making sure that they understand. But as far as my big, like tests and quizzes, I have the same stuff, but I put a lot more online.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was an interesting interview. It was good to see Mac Hall 137 again. But
Yeah.
what were some of our takeaways from this interview, Todd?
Yeah, I think some key things to take away from this is that one, it's useful to practice using the room before you do it, especially if you're going to be transitioning to multiple different rooms like Leah does. Two, you may have to change your assignments, but it's not always bad to do so. I mean, Leah mentioned that she gets to do more writing now in her courses than she got to do previously when she was just doing face-to-face courses. The third takeaway, I think, is it's useful to try and meet all of your students face-to-face at least once during the semester. And then the final takeaway is that if you don't have access to a room like that, you might not have access to a full-featured room like Mac 137, but there are other things that you can do for a more sort of lightweight approach to doing discussions in a distance, using distance methods. And so if you want to have some ideas on how to do that, we have a document attached to this email that will go out with the video, and that instructors can kind of look through there. And I think a lot of the techniques that Leah told us about would be applicable to those same environments as well.
Great. So that's a lot of great information to get our discussion-based courses off and running. And then they can always, of course, reach out to cattle@uwgb.edu. And then I'm going to invite our viewers to tune in next week when we'll be talking about project-based courses. So thanks for watching.